I know I'm only on 1 day a week. I get it. I'm gonna have to jump on GarageBand and start sawing something together. This is the House Bar Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive, and all. Yeah, it's going to be good.
Hey, Hal, did you mean something like this?
This is the House Bar Show. Wow. And a guitar note, and then progressive, and all. Yeah, it's going to be good.
The Hal Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Welcome back. Joining us right now is Ty from myheropower.com. I wanted to talk to Ty today specifically. I mean, we've had Ty on to talk about the company before, and if you don't know what My Hero Power does, is they allow you to put your monthly payment that you pay for electricity in your home and all that towards renewables without having to change anything materially in your domicile, which is the big thing that a lot of people can't grasp, right? They're like, oh, because I just got solar panels on my home. So we went through that process.
Yay.
And they are flipping the switch on it next week. So there's a permitting process, and they come out and they have a guy climb on your roof and stomp around for a while and drill holes. And
that's my favorite part.
Yeah. And then they put the panels in, then they squirt some caulk around it. So when it rains, you're like, oh, thanks for sunshine. And all that stuff. That's a lot. And it's a lot for some people, and it's a lot for, to think about the investment. I live in an area, especially where, water and power are scarce sometimes, and air conditioning is a big part of life. So occasionally they'll tell you to turn your power down. No, don't use as much. So if I can take weight off that system, I feel like I have a responsibility to do so. It's not even so much about locking in my power costs, but also it gives me the ability to know that I'm not drawing from the grid the way everybody else is. Ty, are you with us? Are you there?
I am.
Yeah.
Yes. Congratulations on your solar purchase.
Thanks. It's a big deal, and I'm very proud. Years later, after I had my house in Venice for a long time, and that was always the intention. But it was like just starting to have incentives and the ability to do that. Now it's pretty well. That wheel is pretty greased right now. Before we get into, because you have an environmental podcast that you talk about, not only just our effect on the environment that we have by the petroleum that we use, the fossil fuels we use, and coal obviously is, probably the biggest polluter in there, mixed with, of course, methane, the idea that it's all cow wind. And we all know, I guess, morally and emotionally that Johnny Million is probably as responsible individually as a herd for that situation.
And you're not going to hit me with a sound effect after all that?
I actually was waiting for the moment. There you go. But tell us, first of all, tell us about the podcast so people can also listen to that as well, and kind of get us up to speed on that. And then I have some questions about, that shift and the idea for the company and how you guys actually turned a good idea into something helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So I host the Climate Pod every week. So every week we have discussions with the leading experts on the science, but also the economics, the politics, the social justice issues, the cultural issues around the climate crisis, and all that the climate crisis impacts, and all that has contributed to the climate crisis. So we have world leading experts. We have world leaders. We just recently had the Prime Minister of Australia on the podcast. But so much of where we are today is a result of decisions that were made a long time ago, and I'm talking about decades ago. And we've got to understand why those decisions are made, and why we are in the place where we are today. And that's really what our podcast is about, because the science is the science. It's straightforward. For the most part, people understand now that as we continue to emit carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, we are warming the planet.
Right.
But understanding, why that has happened and why it's been uncontrolled for so long, and why these fossil fuel companies have been able to get away with misleading, with lying, and basically delaying climate action for decades. That is the real part of the story that we try to tell on the Climate Pod every week.
Yeah, well, those companies can't do that unless there is a reciprocal benefit felt by other people, even if it's, all the way down to the voter, where, we knew pollution was terrible and that you don't want it in your lungs a long time ago. I mean, LA, where I live, when I moved to Los Angeles, when I was, I graduated high school and drove straight to LA, when I got there, the sky was yellow and brown half the time. It was ugly. You could see the pollution. And in many ways, the efforts to clean up that pollution you could see was, tipped against, we'll hide the fact you've kind of forgotten about it a little bit. Once you can't see it anymore, no harm, no foul. And we as the users, the end users of the product, I think, have known for a very long time. Probably, I wouldn't go back as early as some people, but late 70s, the 90s, really, like I said, when you could see the sky in a lot of places. We've been aware of the damage it can do to our lives and the environment locally. And over time, we have grown to understand the broader impacts of it because it's never been more interconnected. As people and business people travel and as the economy gets more intertwined, we weren't as aware of the pollution ring around Beijing, for example, which is a miracle of modern idiocy. If anybody knows about this, Beijing's built like a bullseye. And so they decided to build what they call the industrial ring around the city to ring the city with factories so everybody could just drive straight out from their apartment building to it, no matter where they were. And it basically surrounded the city with choking smoke that no matter which way the wind blowed, there was enough to blanket the city. I think people had forgotten that there were cities like that all over the world because we had cleaned up our skies a little bit. And now we realize we're all tied together in this. So how do you, and having spoken to the person from, Australia, for example, who was it? Their environmental,
No, the Prime Minister.
Oh, the Prime Minister.
Turnbull.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So not necessarily the most environmentally friendly guy ultimately, although they've got a lot of, it's big sky country down there. And so, sometimes hotter climates mean bigger spiders. And that's the important thing. We've got over 100,000. The crocs have all come back because we're going back to an environment we haven't seen since the dinosaurs lived. Those greenhouse gases, I'm sure the crocodiles don't mind to some degree. They really don't. But, their linkage with us, you're talking to, this is something that during the rise of this was an impossibility, the rise of the petroleum industry. And now there's an awareness that they're not necessarily the good guys and they may have been selling us a bill of goods. And we may have been looking the other way ourselves because we didn't see another option at the time.
Right. And as consumers, we don't have another option. I mean,
right.
And I think that's the critical thing to understand here. You're talking about air pollution and something that this number is really hard to wrap your head around, but 7 million people die every single year from air pollution around the world. 7 million. And that number in 2021 seems incomprehensible. And so much of that, so much of like you were talking about around Beijing, same thing here in the United States.
Yep.
Those coal plants, those natural gas plants are built in poorer communities, right? Where people they do not choose to live near these coal and gas plants. They're built there on purpose because companies know that people living in those communities don't have the political power a lot of the times to stop that. Well, so 7 million people are dying every year unnecessarily. And with, you talk about LA as an example. LA is a fantastic example. Mm-hmm. We know that air pollution regulation works because you can see the sky in LA now, right? Yeah, it works.
Yes.
And so that's the frustrating thing is we know the problem. We know the solutions. We have the solutions available to us today, but we just don't have the political will to get it done. And that is what is so incredibly frustrating when you look at the state of the world today.
I will say, and since we're coming up on the break, I'd like you to stay through the break with us if you have time, because this is an important part of this conversation on 9/11, for me anyways, to discuss, what got us to the point where we were so engaged in the Middle East in a violent way that led us to a circumstance where this kind of thing could happen. That believe me, I don't know if you even know this. I might be springing this on you, Ty. Do you realize that the first person to be killed by a car, run over by a car in the United States, was killed by, do you know it? An electric car.
No. Oh, yes.
Henry
definitely. Yeah.
Yes. Henry Bliss was killed in San Francisco stepping off of a trolley car, which was also electric, lined up with an electrical system that they have throughout the city. And he stepped off that thing and he was hit by a speeding electric vehicle going all of 9 miles an hour. Took him 3 days to die. Things happened way slower back then. And there were articles about how these monstrosities moved far too fast to be allowed in cities. But they were electric. The initial, taxis, the vast majority of them were electric because they didn't pollute. They were quieter. And as we move towards better battery technology, our awareness of, moving from lithium ion to solid state batteries and the like, I've talked about that a lot on my live stream. There is an opportunity now for what I would call a force accelerator in this, an industrial leap forward. Like interestingly enough, that I think the technology was held back so long, where the petroleum companies stiff-armed, electric vehicles and the like to keep their profits up, that they pushed it back so long that literally the technology has been able to grow in the background with battery life and all kinds of other things, that it's going to snap forward in a way that it will take, over the span of human time, 30, 40 years, but in the time of the consumer's mind, 5 years. It will shock the system. When we have the F-150 from, Ford coming out that's fully electric that you could power your house on for 3 days from the battery system in it in a storm or an emergency, that's something the, NASCAR, Trump fan, off the grid prepper types are, quite frankly, huge fans of. And that happened almost in an instant as far as their experience. And I think that's how it can. Let's take a break. And when we come back, I want to talk about sort of the way forward and how we transition that for people who are want to make those steps, right? So we'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk on WCPT 820 AM. We'll be back right after this. Thanks, Johnny. There you go.
You're listening to Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I thought there was going to be like a new one every break. I was so excited.
You want more, Hal? We'll give you more. Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820. Hoo-yah!
Very macho. The whole thing's very macho. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We're live streaming at infotainmentworks.com and, of course, at fwank.com, FWANQ.com. And with us is Ty from My Hero Power, myheropower.com. Check it out in the break. Because as much as I would like to pimp the service, which I genuinely believe in, I am curious that in the, like I said, this ties in for me to 9/11 because of our obvious involvement in decades and decades of dealing with oil producers, largely in the Middle East, and the horridness of our relationship with OPEC, even the hostage crisis that ultimately ended the Carter administration and shepherded in the Reagan administration. First of all, what was the sort of, for lack of a better, for a better Ben Franklin analogy, what was the lightning bolt that made you decide to create a business like this to help people in this shift, or even that it was possible?
Yeah, I think, for us, we always wanted to make it easier for people to, to contribute to renewable energy, right? So much of the talk around renewable energy or this transition to a green economy is the sacrifices that people have to make, you know? And that's not true. I mean, that messaging is coming from conservatives. It's coming from the fossil fuel company. This whole idea of cutting your carbon footprint, your personal carbon footprint, the things that you have to sacrifice to do that. None of that's true. And what we wanted to do is just make it easy. Your life doesn't have to change, right, for you to support renewable energy, but for you to also support politicians that are going out and promoting more renewable energy, making it possible for us to power our lives on renewable energy, just like we power our lives right now with fossil fuels. The alternatives exist. We actually have the technology today with 2021 technology to totally decarbonize the electricity grid in less than 15 years. And that's with the solar panels, the wind turbines, and the battery technology that we have today. Imagine how much all of that technology is going to continue to improve as it has for the last couple of decades. So the transition the only reason why we're not doing it is for political reason. It has nothing to do with technology, and it really has nothing to do with sacrifice. We've got to talk about the benefits. And that's really why we started Hero Power.
Well, and I would say, again, when people say the reasoning is political, I don't like to shift the blame off of us. Politicians ultimately chase the dominant thought form, and if the dominant thought form is run by industry because there is no corresponding argument to that dominant thought form, i.e. coal and gas for a very long time, then there is no alternative for that politician to even pitch to the American people as it might be tough for a while, but we really need to do this. That was a conversation that Jimmy Carter was having, putting solar panels on the White House and limiting, finally passing the rules on limiting lead exposure in fuel. And then pushing there was a shift in, I think, environmental groups towards a more local, all politics being local, if we're going to make that argument, that if you understanding the damage of pollution, like you said, we send 100,000 kids to the hospital every year with pollution-related illnesses, respiratory illnesses, and skin problems, and all kinds of other stuff. 100,000. And I've often said, when you're arguing with the right wing, especially who are, against any kind of environmental cause, you can argue that point with them. I don't need you to understand climate change. I don't need you to grasp it. But you can understand toxic water, toxic air. And the people that you were talking about, especially the impoverished people of places like West Virginia that are around these coal places, I would even argue that downstream, and I've talked about this being from Kentucky myself and growing up and going to scout jamborees with kids from Eastern Kentucky who were living in Appalachia and were downstream, didn't even benefit from the coal jobs, were miles and miles and miles away from these places and were drinking toxic water from these places. And their relatives had birth defects for decades because of this. That argument, in a caring sense with these folks, and going, we're talking about not polluting water. We're talking about not polluting the air because of, the children, the unborn. If you want to talk about the damage done to the unborn from environmental toxins that simply are not there if we shift to renewables. And then the geopolitical ties that we have to maintain just to guarantee that oil prices, even Biden had to, talk to to OPEC about, increasing supply. That's not oil we even use anymore. That's so that the prices in Europe don't go up, so that our oil companies don't chase that higher price, sell to Europe, and the price in the United States goes up, affecting the economy. We are still making political decisions about the health of our economy based on oil we don't even use. And that, I think, is where I think we can start pushing the conversation as well. So I know you're not necessarily going to want to do it on on today in particular, but I'm going to. MyHeroPower.com. Please go check it out if you're in an area. And what it you'll see what it does. Now, here's the thing. In talking on your climate podcast, if people are interested in keeping up with this, what was, before we get to the bottom of the hour, what was sort of the biggest shock or eye-opening fact or experience you had in doing the podcast? Because obviously you wouldn't do it if you weren't already engaged in the conversation. But there has to have been a oh my gosh moment at some point in doing the show over the last however long you've been the last year especially.
130 some episodes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much. I mean, talking to experts all around the world, we learn something every single week. I will tell you this though, and it is relevant to the conversation that you're having today.
Mm-hmm.
The 1970s were the critical decade for setting the American pathway, the energy pathway. I actually spoke with the historian Jay Hakes on the podcast about his book Energy Crises. And what most people remember about the gas crisis of the 70s is just these long lines at the pump. But what most people don't realize is that the decisions that were made in response to this oil crisis by Nixon, Ford, and Carter, they locked us in to this fossil fuel dependence for the next 50 years. And of course, Reagan came in and only made everything worse.
Right.
But understanding our response to a tragedy, right, to a crisis, and figuring out the long-term repercussions of that, of all those decisions that were made in the 70s. I mean, really, as you look at other crises that America has faced over the decades and seeing how we've responded, most of the time not well. And it just helps you understand, again, where we are today, why we are in the place we are today. And you just hope that we and our leaders can learn from those mistakes and start responding better.
Yeah, I will, in my own way, push back on that a little bit, because I would like to remind everybody in our own personal growth arc and in the growth arc of any nation on earth or all the other nations on earth, there is a level of assumed both interest and awareness and ability, a responsibility that we think, we look back on generations past, they had a responsibility to fix this before it became a crisis without the ability to actually respond. That the technology we are dealing with today, again, is a force accelerator. From AI and computers and the ability to kind of design a car and put it out without ever having to do it. Like new cars from Tesla, for example, they pass the crash test that they do before they are ever fabricated because of technology. They can make an electric car and present it to DOT, to the Department of Transportation, and then run the test and know it will pass. Something that cars way back when they didn't, that wasn't even a remote possibility. When I had a 512K Mac, and that was amazing, right? When there were no hard drives in your computer, you had disks, and that was that. We now have no excuse. We now have responsibility because we have the ability to respond. We have alternatives. We have an awareness of the damage like no other generation ever on Earth. We are the generation that people can look back in the future and go and say they could have and should have done something in a drastic way. I don't blame my grandparents or my parents' generation, because quite frankly, the intermix of social and domestic dynamics mixed with foreign, economics and the fact that we didn't even have enough gas stations to get a car from A to B a long time ago, and we had range anxiety about that. They gave us every horror movie in the 50s. We're at the end of the hour, but I want to remind everybody to go to myheropower.com. check it out. And if it's a possibility in your area, especially in the Chicagoland area, to start, you know, using renewables before the system around you has changed. You be a part of that. You can put your money where your mouth is. You can put your money where your belief system is. And with, you know, it's not going to be a tooth pull. And then knowing that, knowing you're doing that, then even stepping further into it. Maybe that's the first step, and then you put solar panels on your house as well. Perhaps you, if you're out in the far reaches of Illinois, you can start looking into geothermal as a possibility and those kind of things. Getting your system where you don't ever have to be a part of that energy grid except to maybe share what you're making with everyone else. It's a great possibility. And thanks so much, Ty, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll be back right after this. I totally wrote into the break, but that's what we got to do. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I've had people walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at halsparks.com.
I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Fuss-faced little pimp stick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome back. You know, I'm really glad that the timing worked out that we got to talk to Ty on today, because like I said, what it means to me to never forget 9/11 is to never forget what got us there. And I'm really against, you gotta have to know this from an ethical and moral standpoint, I am against casting aspersions on previous generations for not knowing what we know now. It is arrogant and silly, and takes a lot of the responsibility off of us. I was showing Johnny Million something during the break, and then I showing the chat room that outside of Las Vegas.
If you're listening on the radio, sorry.
You can look it up. Look up molten salt and Vegas, and believe me, a fancy restaurant in one of the casinos will not come up. Although you could absolutely, if there were, that sounds like a Vegas restaurant. Have you guys been to Molten Salt yet? Oh my God, it's amazing. I mean, they coat everything in salt, and you'll die of a heart attack the second you lick anything. But yeah, it's fabulous, fabulous. The ice cream, try it. The molten salt stores the heat from all these solar panels, these mirrors really, that are reflecting the sun directly at this point. And then it stays hot all night long and creates steam. And a lot of our cities run on steam engines, kids. It's kind of amazing. We're yet to move into the Nikola Tesla world where we're getting direct energy from a lot of what we're doing. A lot of what we run on, because of our roots in the fossil fuel industry, are, like a train engine. We're just shoveling coal in there to make the steam, puff through, and the pressure turns something, and now off we go. Or minor explosions, as it would be in a car's engine. In this case, there was one of those solar reactors in the desert outside of Las Vegas, and you would drive past it and blind yourself because it was a novelty, and you're like, wow, what is that thing? And it is as bright as the sun. Do not look at it. Look at pictures, but when you drive through, unless you have, the glasses that...
I bet Trump could look at it.
Totally, yes. I was about to say, yes. Anybody but Trump. Trump can stare directly into it, apparently. And what's weird is he can stare at the sun for a very long time, and it never affects his brain.
Free healthcare for look. To me, Corona means Italy. Euromisia.
So luckily, he's one of the superhumans who
He seems fine.
He seems fine after that. But there was one of those. Now there's three of them. And they're all on the east side of the road of the 215 driving south to Los Angeles or north to Vegas. I guarantee in the next 10 years, there's going to be 3 to 5 more of them, and they'll be on either side. So there will be, and then someone will sue, probably me, for degenerative eye disorder from all the, because I drive back and forth from Vegas to Los Angeles so often that I look out my window and I'm like, I'm blind. I'm blind for a while. I'm blind. But that is going to increase more and more. Did you just send me a picture, or that just went through? It just went boop boop on your little screen. It was good.
Oh, I don't know why. But I had it for a while.
But again, this is a technology that is increasingly coming online, that will work well in all desert communities as a power source, is not reliant on how efficient solar power is. Mirrors are mirrors are mirrors are mirrors. They, and at some point, those mirrors can also be solar panels that you allow some of the UV to pass through and some of it to be reflected back. The direct light spectrum stuff, the heat of it gets reflected back. The absorbed energy can be used for power on a bunch of fronts. Those things get hot on their own just from the sunlight. That you can also drift off. There are 3 sources of energy from every single one of these technologies. Now, this technology is relatively new. The second one's better. The third one's even better than that. By the time they get to get these really solid, they'll eventually have a little guard around the outside of it where the visible light doesn't come out, but it's continuing to bounce through, so that when you're driving, you won't be staring into 5 suns when you're driving through the desert. This is technology that, in theory, has been around since ever, but the ability to do it, or do it efficiently, or capture it, is new and improving all the time. And we have not only a moral duty, I believe, to focus on this, we also, just on not damaging the environment, but also because of the geopolitical pushback that we get because we've been in bed with oil companies that are in bed with the worst people in the world, and oftentimes are worse than them. I am always reminded, remember when the BP spill happened in the Gulf? And the head of BP comes out and he says, I just want my life to go back to normal. Remember that?
The poor guy.
Remember that? He was like, and people are like, how?
Very sad that he had to talk to people about it.
Yeah. Well, you know why? There was a reason why he felt that way. Besides, he was a disgusting human being. There's a reason why he felt entitled to not be bothered to even talk about this. Because Exxon had been dumping that amount of oil into the Congo every year for decades. So what's the big deal? The Gulf is enormous. There are underground volcanoes. Why are you bothering me? Well, underground volcanoes, we have to deal with as a natural part of it. We don't need to add. Life has enough problems without you adding stuff on top of it, is the reason, dum-dum. And this particular, this particular, his reaction was based on the idea that he knew guys in his job all over the world that pollute this much. They just do it closer to poor people. People with no recourse. The mistake BP made was polluting waters near people who would get angry and had the means and wherewithal to do something about it. A functioning government that could push back on it. An electorate and a citizenry that wasn't having it anymore. And could do something about it rather than just, deal with death squads. That's why he had to deal with it. That's why he was having to go in front of, give statements where the head of Exxon or the Tillersons of the world were not. They never had to do that stuff because they all did it in places where, does anybody really care? Right? And even in the areas, and on top of it, and this relates again to the sort of, to our sort of theme about environmental 9/11 remembrance, that even in the areas where they were dealing with pouring toxins in, the people that were running the area, that were allowing the corruption in the Niger Delta and other places, or in the Middle East and in Iraq and Afghanistan and places like that where oil was coming from, the leadership was so equally violently corrupt that even the American populace, the world populace, not just us, because we're not solely respond. We consume a lot of the world's oil, but not nearly as much, you know, that the whole like, Europe doesn't even bother to spend. Yes, they do. And yes, they did. They just didn't tell the truth about it for a long time. And Russia was even worse about it. Just choking cities, disgusting air pollution. Still to this day, it's always a problem. Even in those moments, you know, in dealing with those, we as a society were like, well, we may be polluting those areas, but those folks are violent monsters who enslave their own people and blah, blah, blah. Like you could look down at the populace because of what their government was like. And they did the same with us. Our government was, or our corporations were these big violent things. So if we blew up some citizens, what's the difference? This is a human reaction to these things, one that we have to take responsibility for in ourselves when we see ourselves doing it. We got to take a break. When we come back, calls 773-763-9278. I think, you know, maybe this diverges from how other people remember 9/11. And maybe that's the gift I feel like I can give in this, you know, in this holiday, this holy day that we reference, you know, the passing of these people. How we can best remember those people is to never get involved in a geopolitical resource war again, ever. And to learn from the ones and heal from the ones that we've been in so that the trade that happens between countries is in businesses that are not crucial and binding and cause us to morally look the other way. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk.